and a father. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I think I know someone who might be able to help us. Ooh. True king builds bridges.
You're not as bad at this as you think. If you lead the seven.
Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, 2023. Comprehensive analyses and explanations. These analyses and explanations delve into the narrative, themes, and execution of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, exploring its role as a franchise conclusion. The film positions itself as a story about legacy, both for its hero and the cinematic universe it concludes. Arthur Curry's struggle is no longer about claiming a throne, but about the kind of king and father he wishes to be, setting a personal stake against a fantastical plot. A critical analysis reveals the central tension between a character-driven sequel and a franchise obligation. The forced inclusion of universe-ending stakes often undermines the more intimate story of brotherhood the film seems to want to tell. The opening act establishes a tone of domestic comedy and political frustration, a stark contrast to the first film's epic scale. This choice grounds Arthur, but also creates a pacing imbalance as the plot must accelerate to introduce the global threat. Black Manta's quest for vengeance is psychologically compelling, a raw and human motive that makes him a mirror to Arthur's own loss. His discovery of the Black Trident, however, shifts the narrative from personal feud to supernatural conquest. The introduction of the lost kingdom of Necrus and its ruler, Kordax, expands Atlantean mythology, but at a cost. It reframes Manta from a self-made antagonist to a possessed vessel, diluting his agency and the purity of his revenge. The environmental allegory of the orichalcum is the film's most ambitious, if clumsy, thematic reach. It directly links the villain's power source to climate change, creating a literal manifestation of pollution as a world-ending weapon. ORM's release from prison forms the narrative and emotional backbone. His arc from arrogant supremacist to a man recognizing the value of surface-world simplicity provides the film's most consistent and satisfying progression. The buddy dynamic between Arthur and ORM is the engine of the film's success. Their banter, built on a foundation of mutual resentment and unspoken kinship, offers humor and pathos that the larger plot sometimes lacks. Mara's reduced role is narratively justified by her injury, but is felt throughout. Her absence from the central adventure removes a key emotional counterbalance and action partner for Arthur, altering the trio dynamic of the first film. The thematic exploration of brotherhood extends beyond blood. It contrasts Arthur and ORM's eventual loyalty with Manta's corrupted lineage of vengeance, represented by his ancestral armor and his fixation on his father's death. Visually, the film attempts to outscale its predecessor with the icy, biomechanical hellscape of Necrus. This setting provides a visual antithesis to the vibrant, life-filled Atlantis, symbolizing death and ancient corruption. Critiques of the CGI often stem from a perceived over-reliance on digital environments and creatures, which can lack texture and weight. This contrasts with the praised practical stunt work and actor performances in the partnership scenes. The action sequencing showcases James Wan's horror roots in the horror-tinged possession of Manta and the body horror of the Necrus soldiers. However, these tones clash with the comedic beats and family drama. The climatic battle, while spectacular, suffers from predictable stakes. The necessity to stop a ritual and break a magical seal follows a familiar superhero blueprint, lessening narrative surprise in favor of visual spectacle. ORM's redemption is earned through sacrifice and choice. His decision to return to captivity and Arthur's subsequent decision to free him completes both their arcs, one finding humility, the other learning mercy over strict law. Arthur's final speech to the United Nations is the thematic culmination, declaring the film's core message of unity. It is a literal and symbolic breaking of the surface between worlds, advocating for shared responsibility for the planet. The film's handling of its climate message is paradoxical. While making pollution a central plot device, it offers a fantastical, immediate solution, destroying the orichalcum reactor, that simplifies a complex real-world crisis. The post-credits scene, featuring a final meal with Manta's ally Dr. Shin, feels less like a sequel tease and more like a subdued, character-focused epilogue for a closing universe, emphasizing uneasy alliances. Performances anchor the spectacle. Jason Momoa embodies a king uncomfortable with formality, while Patrick Wilson masterfully portrays a man deconstructing a lifetime of dogma, finding subtle humor in his disdain. Yahya Abdul-Mateen too commits physically to Manta's rage, but the script denies him a nuanced conclusion, his humanity fully subsumed by Kordax, making his fate more of an exorcism than a defeat. The score and sound design continue to blend oceanic themes with heroic motifs, but lack a new iconic theme to match the first films, reflecting the sequel's struggle to establish a distinct identity. From a production standpoint, the film bears the marks of a difficult development, including reshoots, narrative refocusing, and the challenges of filming during a pandemic, which contributed to its disjointed feel. The film serves as a metaphor for the DCU itself. Ambitious, visually bold, packed with ideas, but ultimately uneven and struggling to harmonize its conflicting tones and priorities under a single vision. In final analysis, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is a film of compelling duos Arthur and ORM, land and sea, legacy and future that ultimately cannot reconcile its own dual nature as a personal story and a franchise finale. The film's core narrative conflict stems from a deliberate shift from mythic destiny to the burdens of established power. Arthur Curry now wrestles with the tedious bureaucracy of kingship, a stark contrast to his previous journey of self-discovery and triumphant ascent. This foundational tension between the man and the monarch frames every subsequent challenge he faces. Black Manta's relentless pursuit operates on a parallel track of obsession, his grief calcified into a singular purpose that ironically mirrors Arthur's own focused will from the first film. Environmental catastrophe is not merely a backdrop, but an active narrative antagonist directly linked to the villain's tools. The ancient fuel source orichalcum presents a clever narrative device, fusing comic book mysticism with contemporary global anxiety. This choice attempts to ground the fantastical stakes in a recognizable real-world issue, though its integration into the plot mechanics often feels more expedient than organic. The warming planet and acidifying oceans serve as a constant, ticking clock that pressures both the surface and aquatic worlds equally. The dynamic between Arthur and ORM evolves into the film's undeniable emotional core, transforming a former rivalry into a complex study of fractured kinship. Their forced alliance crackles with unresolved history and reluctant respect, providing a character-driven engine that often outshines the larger apocalyptic plot. ORM's journey from exiled royal to reluctant hero offers a more nuanced arc than Arthur's own, as he must unlearn a lifetime of Atlantean supremacy and confront the simpler virtues of the surface world he once despised. Visual storytelling through production design highlights the clash between ancient corruption and living civilization. The Lost Kingdom of Necrus stands as a visual antithesis to Atlantis, rendered in jagged obsidian and necrotic energy rather than bioluminescent wonder. This aesthetic division physically manifests the film's thematic battle between life and decay, a corruption that actively seeks to consume the vibrant world Arthur has sworn to protect. The technology of Necrus feels deliberately invasive and parasitic, contrasting with Atlantean tech's harmonious blend with nature. Black Manta's descent from vengeful human to possessed conduit represents a significant narrative trade-off. His personal vendetta, a compelling and intimate motivation, is ultimately subsumed by the ancient will of Kordax. This shift reframes the final confrontation from a personal settlement of scores to a more conventional battle against a primordial evil. While this amplifies the scale of the threat, it arguably diminishes the emotional specificity that made Manta a uniquely grounded adversary in the superhero genre. The film's pacing struggles to balance its multiple genres and tones, creating an experience that can feel both overstuffed and intermittently sparse. Sequences of comedic buddy cop banter between the brothers abruptly transition into horror-tinged possession scenes and large-scale digital battles. This tonal juggling act, while ambitious, prevents any single element from achieving full depth or sustained momentum, leaving the narrative feeling perpetually in transit between different modes of storytelling. Mara's sidelined role creates a noticeable vacuum in the film's emotional and action-oriented landscape. Her enforced absence reshapes the team dynamics, pushing the fraternal relationship to the forefront, but removing a key source of wisdom, power, and balance. This narrative choice focuses the story but also simplifies the heroic ensemble, reducing a potent trio to a duo and lessening the integrative promise of surface and sea partnership that the franchise once championed. The thematic exploration of legacy weighs heavily on every major character, defining their actions through the lens of paternal influence or ancestral sin. Arthur grapples with the legacy of his own father and the one he wishes to build for his son, while Manta is consumed by the legacy of his father's death. ORM contends with the toxic legacy of Atlantean isolationism, and Kordax embodies the vengeful legacy of a banished king. This recursive focus on the past's grip provides a consistent, if sometimes overworked, philosophical through-line. James Wan's directorial signature remains evident in meticulously constructed action set pieces that prioritize fluid geography and inventive weaponry. The choreography emphasizes the unique properties of aquatic combat, even on land, through whirling trident work and environmental manipulation. However, certain sequences suffer from an overabundance of computer-generated elements, creating a visual cacophony that can obscure the spatial clarity and physical stakes once successfully established in the first film. The screenplay's approach to the climate crisis narrative is ultimately more literal metaphor than investigated theme. The orichalcum reactor serves as a monolithic, destroyable source of all pollution, offering a fantastical solution to a complex, systemic problem. This reduction of a global challenge to a single villainous MacGuffin provides clear cinematic stakes but avoids the more challenging, nuanced conversation about shared responsibility the film's climax superficially advocates for. ORM's redemption arc succeeds due to its incremental and earned nature, avoiding a sudden reversal in favor of a gradual thawing of prejudice. His exposure to surface world fragility, particularly through Arthur's family, forces a reevaluation of his core beliefs. His final act of heroism is not performed for glory or reinstatement, but from a genuine, hard-won sense of duty that transcends his former nationalistic dogma, providing the film's most satisfying character resolution. The film's final act, set in the fiery core of a melting Antarctica, strives for a mythic resonance reminiscent of classic sword and sorcery adventures. This setting creates a potent visual of a world in literal dissolution, a fitting battleground for a conflict about planetary survival. The confrontation itself, however, follows a familiar ritual-stopping template, prioritizing spectacle over genuine narrative uncertainty and leaning on well-worn tropes of blood magic and ancient seals. Costume design continues to play a vital role in character definition, particularly in the evolution of Black Manta's armor. Its integration with the corrupting influence of the Black Trident visually chronicles his transformation from man to vessel, with the armor becoming more organic and jagged as Kordax's influence grows. Conversely, Arthur and ORM's attire remains distinctly Atlantean but functional, symbolizing their pragmatic unity over royal pageantry in this crisis. The musical score attempts to weave together the thematic threads of family, legacy, and impending doom. It incorporates echoes of the first film's heroic motifs while introducing darker, more chaotic brass and choral elements for Necros. The music often works hard to supply the emotional cohesion that the fractured narrative sometimes lacks, underlining moments of brotherly connection and epic scale with pronounced emphasis. From a meta-narrative perspective, the film unavoidably functions as an elegy for the DC extended universe, carrying the weight of its shared universe's inconsistencies. This burden manifests in a plot that feels both rushed and overcomplicated, as if compressing several narrative ideas into one final outing. The creative compromises and reported extensive reshoots are palpable in the uneven pacing and certain underdeveloped plot threads. The treatment of Atlantean politics is notably scaled back from the first film, with the other kingdoms playing minimal roles. This narrative choice centers the conflict on the core characters, but at the expense of the rich world building that made Atlantis feel like a living, politically complex society. The realm becomes more of a backdrop and a stake than an active participant in its own salvation. Arthur's character growth is subtly reflected in his leadership style, which evolves from impulsive lone hero to a king who understands strategic delegation, most notably to his brother. His willingness to trust ORM, his former nemesis, with the fate of his family and kingdom marks his most significant maturation, demonstrating a wisdom that moves beyond brute strength or hereditary right. The climactic decision to reveal Atlantis to the world serves as the film's ultimate thesis statement, advocating for transparency and cooperation over isolationism. This moment seeks to reframe the entire franchise's conflict, suggesting that the true Lost Kingdom was not Necros, but a connection between land and sea that had been severed by fear and secrecy. It is an optimistic, if abruptly presented, vision for a future the series will not explore. In its totality, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom stands as a flawed but visually ambitious coda to its hero's journey and its cinematic universe. It shines brightest in the intimate, character-driven moments between its leads, offering a compelling study of brotherhood and redemption. Its grander ambitions to be a climate parable, a mythic epic, and a franchise finale often pull it in conflicting directions, resulting in a spectacle-rich yet narratively uneven voyage that ultimately rides on the charisma of its sovereign and the depth of his hard-won familial bond. The film's narrative foundation cleverly inverts the hero's journey template by presenting a protagonist who has already achieved his throne. Arthur Curry's central struggle is no longer about proving his worth, but about managing the unglamorous reality of governance. This post-coronation perspective offers a fresh take on superhero royalty, focusing on sustainable rule rather than conquest. His internal conflict is mirrored by the external decay of the political order he represents as ancient threats resurface. The very concept of kingship is examined through the lens of environmental stewardship and intergenerational responsibility. This thematic framework elevates what might otherwise be standard blockbuster fare into a conversation about contemporary leadership. Arthur's paternal role introduces profound stakes that transcend typical world-ending scenarios. His desire to protect his son's future becomes intrinsically linked to preserving the planet's ecological balance. This parallel between family and global welfare creates emotional resonance that anchors the more fantastical elements. The film suggests that true legacy is not about monumental architecture or conquered territories, but about habitable environments for future generations. This connection between domestic drama and planetary crisis represents the screenplay's most sophisticated narrative integration. Fatherhood transforms Arthur's motivation from reactive heroism to proactive statesmanship. The environmental message operates on both metaphorical and literal levels throughout the narrative structure. Orichalcum functions as a perfect narrative device representing unchecked industrial ambition divorced from ecological consequence. Its properties as both an ancient power source and a contemporary pollutant bridge mythological and modern anxieties. The film's bold choice to make greenhouse gas emissions a visible glowing substance makes the abstract crisis tangibly cinematic. This literalization of climate change mechanisms within a superhero context demonstrates creative ambition in genre storytelling. The warming oceans become an active antagonist, forcing surface and submarine societies toward inevitable collaboration. Black Manta's transformation follows a classical tragedy arc where his most human desire consumes his humanity entirely. His quest for vengeance begins with understandable grief, but metastasizes into planetary-scale destruction. The corruption by the Black Trident represents how obsession can erase the original self, leaving only a hollow vessel for power. This progression serves as a dark reflection of Arthur's own journey, where external power threatens internal identity. Manta becomes a cautionary tale about the perils of allowing past trauma to dictate future action without reconciliation. His final state embodies the film's warning about surrendering agency to ancient cycles of hatred. The production design philosophy creates distinct visual languages for each kingdom that communicate their core values. Atlantis shines with organic curves and symbiotic technology, suggesting harmony with natural forces. Necrus presents jagged geometries and invasive machinery, reflecting its parasitic relationship with life itself. The Antarctic battlefield merges these aesthetics, showing the corrupting spread of Necrus's influence on pristine environments. These visual choices translate thematic conflicts into immediately comprehensible cinematic space. The attention to ecological detail in each location reinforces the film's central preoccupation with environmental integrity. ORM's character development follows a meticulous path from ideological absolutism to nuanced understanding. His exposure to surface world vulnerabilities systematically dismantles his Atlantean superiority complex. The screenplay wisely avoids instant conversion, instead showing incremental breakthroughs fueled by shared experience. His expertise becoming crucial to the mission validates his worth beyond royal bloodline, establishing new foundations for self-worth. ORM's redemption proves more dramatically compelling than the primary villain's defeat because it requires continuous choice rather than single combat victory. His ultimate freedom symbolizes the breaking of cyclical hatred that entrapped both brothers. The film's tonal management attempts an ambitious synthesis of genres that reflects its thematic concerns with integration. Elements of political thriller surface during Atlantis Council scenes, while horror influences manifest in the body corruption of Necrus warriors. Buddy comedy rhythms define the brothers' surface journey, and cosmic adventure tropes guide the final act. This generic blending mirrors the story's argument about necessary collaboration between disparate elements. While not always seamless, this approach creates a distinctive texture that distinguishes it from more tonally uniform superhero productions. The earnestness of its environmental advocacy anchors the more fantastical genre elements. Mara's narrative function transforms from active partner to symbolic ideal during her convalescence. She represents the peaceful kingdom Arthur fights to preserve and the domestic future he hopes to secure. Her reduced physical presence paradoxically elevates her symbolic importance as the embodiment of what's at stake. The scenes featuring her defense of the palace demonstrate how effectively she has internalized her role as guardian of Atlantean continuity. Her wisdom continues to guide Arthur's decisions, even from a distance, maintaining her influence on the narrative trajectory. This approach recontextualizes the hero's journey as a shared burden rather than individual destiny. The mythological expansion through Kordax connects to broader superhero narrative traditions about buried histories. This ancient king represents the dangerous allure of a romanticized past that threatens progressive futures. His philosophy of domination contrasts sharply with Arthur's vision of cooperative stewardship, offering clear ideological stakes. The backstory of the Seven Kingdoms establishes how environmental catastrophe has always been intertwined with political failure in this universe. Kordax's imprisonment demonstrates how previous generations chose containment over solution, passing responsibility forward. This mythological layer adds historical weight to the contemporary crisis. Cinematographic choices emphasize the contrast between open ocean freedom and claustrophobic technological spaces. Sweeping underwater vistas establish the beauty worth preserving, while tight angles in Necrus create visceral discomfort. Camera movements during battle sequences often follow weapon trajectories, enhancing the dynamism of combat. The use of reflective surfaces in Atlantean architecture multiplies light sources, creating a unique visual signature. On the surface, the photography adopts more conventional blockbuster aesthetics, highlighting Arthur's dual citizenship. These visual strategies help audiences navigate the story's shifting environments and perspectives. The screenplay's structural approach balances parallel narratives that eventually converge with geographical logic. Arthur and ORM's investigative journey follows the orichalcum trail upward from ocean depths to volcanic sources. Manta's descent follows the opposite path downward into mythological darkness and psychological fragmentation. These mirroring journeys create satisfying narrative symmetry when they collide at the Antarctic convergence point. The pacing issues stem from this structural ambition, attempting to give weight to both intimate character moments and apocalyptic spectacle. The editing sometimes struggles to maintain equilibrium between these competing priorities. The political commentary embedded in the narrative extends beyond environmentalism to international diplomacy. The United Nations scene crystallizes the film's argument for transparency over secrecy in global governance. Arthur's revelation challenges centuries of isolationist policy, representing a revolutionary political act. This moment reframes the entire franchise as a gradual movement toward interstellar diplomacy with surface dwellers. The mixed reactions from world leaders ground this fantastic scenario in recognizable geopolitical realism. The film ultimately advocates for radical cooperation in the face of shared existential threats. The sound design creates immersive environments through careful layering of biological and technological audio elements. Atlantis resonates with whale song harmonics and fluid dynamics, while Necrus crackles with crystalline shattering and energy distortion. The Black Trident produces a distinctive auditory signature that corrupts the natural soundscape wherever it appears. These audio cues provide subconscious guidance about environmental health and moral alignment. The mixing emphasizes different frequency ranges for each kingdom, helping audiences orient themselves during rapid location changes. This sophisticated audio strategy enhances world-building beyond visual means. Arthur's leadership evolution demonstrates how humility becomes a strategic asset rather than a royal shortcoming. His acknowledgement of ORM's superior knowledge represents significant growth from his previous impulsive autonomy. This willingness to rely on others transforms his kingship from symbolic figurehead to effective coordinator of expertise. His diplomatic approach to surface governments contrasts with his earlier confrontational style, showing matured understanding of political complexity. The film argues that true strength lies in recognizing limitations and building complementary alliances. This model of leadership offers a meaningful alternative to the solitary hero archetype. The thematic exploration of inheritance questions what values deserve transmission between generations. Arthur rejects the violent sovereignty model of his mother's people and the disconnected observation of his father's world. He seeks to synthesize a new legacy of engaged protection that honors both lineages without repeating their mistakes. Black Manta inherits only his father's grievance, missing the opportunity to create a different conclusion to their story. ORM must decide whether to perpetuate his family's elitism or forge an independent identity. These parallel inheritance narratives create rich thematic texture about breaking destructive cycles. The costume evolution tracks character development through material changes and symbolic details. Arthur's royal attire becomes progressively more battle-damaged and practical as he moves from ceremony to active crisis management. ORM's surface world clothing marks his transitional identity, borrowing elements from Arthur's wardrobe but retaining Atlantean accents. Black Manta's armor undergoes a biological transformation, becoming less mechanical and more exoskeletal as Kordax's influence grows. These visual storytelling elements provide continuous character information without exposition. The design philosophy connects personal transformation to physical representation. The film's philosophical underpinnings engage with ecological ethics through the concept of intrinsic value. The portrayal of marine life as conscious communities rather than background elements challenges anthropocentric perspectives. The suffering of sea creatures due to orichalcum pollution receives narrative attention, expanding moral consideration. This approach extends the film's environmental message beyond human survival to encompass planetary biosphere integrity. The connection between Necrus technology and life negation reinforces this ethical framework. These elements elevate the production above simple adventure storytelling toward meaningful ecological commentary. The brotherly dynamic succeeds through consistent contrast in problem-solving methodologies and worldviews. Arthur's intuitive improvisation clashes productively with ORM's systematic analysis throughout their partnership. Their conflict often centers on the most efficient path to shared goals rather than fundamental opposition. This writing choice maintains tension while reinforcing their growing mutual respect. The humor derives naturally from their contrasting personalities, avoiding forced comedic set pieces. Their evolving cooperation models the film's central thesis about complementary strengths creating superior outcomes. The representation of technology follows clear ethical parameters aligned with environmental impact. Atlantean designs emphasize biomimicry and renewable energy integration, suggesting sustainable technological progress. Necros machinery exhibits parasitic characteristics draining life from surroundings for power generation. This visual dichotomy creates immediate moral clarity about which technological paradigm the story endorses. The orichalcum reactors serve as perfect hybrid symbols combining ancient knowledge with catastrophic modern-scale consequences. This technological storytelling reinforces themes without requiring explicit dialogue. The narrative treatment of time operates on multiple scales from immediate crisis to millennial history. The present-day urgency of the climate disaster contrasts with the slow geological time of Antarctic ice and the ancient historical time of lost kingdoms. This temporal layering creates narrative depth, suggesting how present actions echo across epochs. The film argues that addressing long-term consequences requires understanding deep historical patterns. The cyclical return of buried threats metaphorically represents how unresolved past failures inevitably resurface. This sophisticated temporal perspective distinguishes the story from more present-focused blockbusters. The direction of actor performances emphasizes physicality and nonverbal communication appropriate for characters from an aquatic culture. Movement patterns convey cultural identity, even when characters are out of their native element. The performances balance larger-than-life presence with intimate vulnerability, maintaining human connection at epic scale. The casting chemistry between leads generates authentic friction and gradual bonding that feels earned rather than scripted. Supporting actors create distinct cultural signatures for their respective kingdoms through demeanor and vocal delivery. This attention to behavioral world-building enhances the fantasy's credibility. The film's relationship with its predecessor involves both continuity and conscious departure in narrative priorities. It maintains visual continuity with established designs while expanding the mythological scope considerably. The shift from origin story to governance chronicle represents natural franchise evolution. Previous character dynamics are acknowledged but not rehashed, allowing for genuine development. New themes are introduced that reframe earlier events through contemporary ecological awareness. This approach respects the existing fan investment while pursuing creative growth beyond repetition of successful formulas. The climatic sequences employ weather phenomena as active narrative elements rather than passive backdrop. The melting ice serves as both timer and terrain, constantly reshaping the battlefield. Extreme weather manifestations visually represent planetary distress, responding to the conflict's violence. The Antarctic location provides symbolic purity, being the planet's last pristine environment now under direct threat. The fire and ice visual contrasts create stunning imagery that reinforces thematic opposition between corruption and preservation. This environmental participation in the climax unifies the plot with its thematic concerns. The resolution provides character conclusions that emphasize new beginnings over absolute endings. Arthur's political revelation opens ongoing diplomatic challenges rather than providing neat closure. ORM's redemption is measured by his freedom to choose his path rather than restored title. Even Manta's fate leaves narrative possibilities regarding his humanity beneath the corruption. This forward-looking denouement reflects the film's emphasis on continuous effort rather than final victories. The emphasis on future responsibility over past triumph provides a mature perspective unusual for franchise conclusions. The film's cultural context as a major production during global climate awareness inevitably shapes its reception and interpretation. Its direct engagement with environmental anxiety resonates with contemporary audience concerns regardless of execution nuances. The choice to center a blockbuster on climate mechanisms reflects changing cultural priorities in popular entertainment. Its solutions may be fantastical, but its acknowledgement of crisis legitimacy carries cultural significance. The film participates in broader media conversations about ecological responsibility in speculative storytelling. This relevance adds layers of meaning beyond surface-level entertainment. The musical themes develop character motifs through variation that reflects narrative transformation. ORM's melody incorporates surface-world instrumentation as his perspective widens. The Necros theme corrupts established Atlantean harmonies with dissonance and irregular rhythms. These compositional choices provide subconscious narrative reinforcement throughout the auditory experience. The score avoids overwhelming action sequences, instead working to highlight emotional beats within spectacle. This restrained approach supports the storytelling without demanding attention for itself. The production challenges inherent in aquatic filmmaking push technological boundaries while influencing creative decisions. The balance between practical effects and digital augmentation seeks to maintain physical credibility in impossible environments. Underwater cinematography techniques create weightless poetry that defines the franchise's visual identity. The need to portray believable aquatic cultures affects everything from costume design to actor movement training. These technical ambitions inevitably impact narrative pacing and scene construction. The final product represents a compromise between visionary goals and practical filmmaking realities. The screenplay's dialogue distinguishes character voices through cultural references and speech patterns. Arthur's surface world colloquialisms contrast with ORM's formal Atlantean diction, creating immediate cultural characterization. Their linguistic convergence during the partnership marks gradual mutual understanding. Manta's dialogue traces his psychological diminishment as his speeches become less personal and more aligned with Kordax's ancient rhetoric. These vocal arcs provide subtle character development alongside more dramatic action-based changes. The attention to linguistic detail enhances the world-building's richness. The film's approach to magic systems establishes consistent rules that intersect with technological and ecological frameworks. The Black Trident's corruption follows identifiable patterns of viral spread rather than arbitrary magical effects. Atlantean abilities remain grounded in physiological adaptation rather than supernatural gift. This pseudoscientific approach to fantasy elements maintains coherent internal logic throughout escalating scenarios. The magical mechanisms directly interact with environmental factors, creating integrated cause and effect chains. This rigorous world-building supports audience immersion in increasingly fantastic situations. The management of stakes maintains tension through simultaneous global and personal danger. The planetary scale threat never overwhelms the intimate family drama at the story's heart. Each large-scale development has corresponding personal consequences for primary characters. This balancing act prevents the narrative from becoming abstract or emotionally distant despite cosmic stakes. The constant intersection between political decisions and private lives reinforces the film's thesis about interconnectedness. This dual-layered tension sustains engagement across different narrative registers. The color palette functions as emotional guide and moral indicator throughout visual storytelling. Blues and golds dominate heroic environments, while sickly greens and charred blacks represent corruption and decay. The progression of Manta's corruption is charted through the gradual invasion of necrotic colors into his visual field. Antarctic sequences balance sterile whites with volcanic oranges, creating visual tension. These chromatic strategies communicate thematic information directly to the audience's subconscious perception. The color psychology enhances narrative clarity without explicit explanation. The editing rhythms alternate between lyrical underwater sequences and frenetic surface action to create experiential contrast. Cross-cutting between parallel narratives maintains momentum while highlighting thematic connections. The pace accelerates logically as converging threats create increasing urgency. Flashback integration provides mythological context without halting forward progression. This editorial balance between exposition, character development, and action sequences demonstrates sophisticated narrative construction. The flow between different tonal modes aims for cohesion despite inherent variety. The film's contribution to the superhero genre involves advancing ecological narratives within mainstream spectacle cinema. It demonstrates how environmental themes can drive plot rather than merely provide backdrop. The integration of climate science with mythological storytelling offers a template for future genre productions. Its emphasis on cooperative solutions over individual heroics suggests genre evolution toward collective protagonism. The serious treatment of planetary crisis within fantastic framework expands genre boundaries regarding acceptable subject matter. This precedent may influence subsequent productions in the genre landscape. The character of Dr. Stephen Shin provides human-scale perspective on the fantastic events unfolding. His scientific curiosity offers audience surrogate functionality, while his moral ambiguity adds complexity. His partnership with Manta demonstrates how worthy motivations can be corrupted through questionable alliances. His survival and continued research suggest ongoing human engagement with the revealed underwater world. This character maintains connection to scientific methodology within magical scenarios. His presence grounds the narrative in recognizable human response to the incredible. The depiction of Atlantean society shows technological advancement without loss of cultural tradition. The seamless integration of ancient architecture with advanced science suggests sustainable progress model. Social structures appear to balance monarchical tradition with meritocratic elements through military and scholarly estates. This cultural portrait avoids simplistic utopianism by showing political tensions and historical failures. The society's willingness to confront its buried mistakes through Arthur's leadership indicates adaptive capacity. This nuanced world-building supports thematic arguments about responsible advancement. The film's final images emphasize cyclical renewal rather than conclusion, with the sun representing future possibilities. The circular structure from Arthur's childhood to his fatherhood completes an intergenerational arc. The open horizon of the final shot suggests ongoing challenges beyond the frame's boundaries. This optimistic ambiguity aligns with the film's message about continuous stewardship rather than final victory. The emphasis on legacy passing forward provides emotional closure while denying narrative finality. This sophisticated ending resonates beyond typical franchise formula conclusions. In retrospective analysis, the film's ambitions often exceed its grasp, yet its reach remains commendable within commercial constraints. The successful elements, particularly the brotherhood dynamics and environmental integration, demonstrate significant creative vision. The flawed execution in pacing and tonal integration reveals the difficulties of balancing multiple priorities. The final product serves as fascinating case study in blockbuster filmmaking attempting substantive thematic engagement. Its cultural moment as pandemic-era production and franchise finale adds layers of external context affecting its reception. The ultimate assessment may evolve as its ecological themes gain increasing relevance in subsequent years. The cinematic language developed for aquatic communication continues to evolve in this installment through refined gestures and kinetic expression. The performer's physicality conveys cultural identity through movement vocabulary distinct from surface dwellers. This nonverbal storytelling enriches scenes where dialogue would be impossible or impractical. The consistency of this visual language across both films establishes credible alien culture within humanoid forms. This attention to behavioral world-building represents sophisticated science fiction, filmmaking often overlooked in action genre criticism. The physical poetry of underwater sequences remains the franchise's most distinctive aesthetic contribution. The film's treatment of historical memory examines how societies choose to remember or forget inconvenient truths. The buried history of Necris represents institutional amnesia about past ecological crimes. Atlantis' selective mythology highlights how power structures shape historical narratives to maintain current authority. Arthur's journey involves uncovering these suppressed truths to address their contemporary consequences. This engagement with historical politics adds intellectual depth to the adventure framework. The film suggests that honest confrontation with past failures is essential for future responsibility, a resonant message beyond its fantasy context. The economic metaphors embedded in the orichalcum narrative reflect critiques of extractive capitalism. The substance represents ultimate commodity valued despite its catastrophic externalities, mirroring real-world fossil fuel dynamics. The mining operation visuals deliberately evoke historical and contemporary resource exploitation imagery. The pursuit of this resource despite evident danger parallels short-term economic thinking privileging profit over sustainability. This allegorical layer, while not subtle, connects the fantasy conflict to material economic realities. The solution requires rejecting the substance's value entirely, advocating for systemic change over incremental reform. The score's thematic development employs aquatic instrumentation and harmonic structures to create auditory identity. The use of waterphones and altered string techniques produces liquid sonic textures unique to the franchise. Character motifs undergo transformation through instrumental variation, reflecting narrative evolution. The music for Necris incorporates metallic percussion and distorted traditional Atlantean themes representing corrupted heritage. This thoughtful compositional approach supports world-building through auditory means. The musical storytelling operates at sophisticated level often absent from comparable blockbuster productions. The The film's perspective on conflict resolution emphasizes negotiation and shared interest over violent domination. Arthur's final strategy involves offering Manta reconciliation rather than pursuing total annihilation. This approach, while unsuccessful, demonstrates consistent philosophical commitment to breaking cycles of violence. The cooperation with ORM models successful conflict transformation through earned trust and mutual necessity. These narrative choices advocate for diplomatic solutions even amidst seemingly irreconcilable opposition. This ideological consistency provides moral coherence to the action spectacle. The production's sustainability measures during filming, while not part of the text itself, reflect the theme's real-world implications. The reported efforts to minimize environmental impact of large-scale filmmaking demonstrate ethical alignment between message and practice. This congruence strengthens the film's authentic commitment to its ecological arguments rather than exploiting concern for commercial gain. The attention to sustainable practices in creating entertainment about sustainability creates meaningful metanarrative resonance. This integrity, though invisible on screen, informs the production's cultural position within environmental discourse. The cinematographic innovation in capturing underwater performances continues to advance in technical proficiency. The development of waterproof camera systems and lighting solutions allows more naturalistic aquatic acting. The evolution from first film to sequel shows increased confidence in submerged sequence duration and complexity. These technical achievements expand cinematic language for representing liquid environments with emotional authenticity. The seamless integration of practical and digital water elements creates believable hybrid environments. This behind-the-scenes artistry fundamentally enables the franchise's distinctive visual identity. The film's duration and pacing reflect modern blockbuster tendencies toward narrative density over elegant simplicity. The inclusion of multiple villain motivations, mythological expansions, and thematic concerns creates rich narrative texture. This approach risks overwhelming casual viewers while rewarding engaged analysis with layered meaning. The editing necessarily sacrifices some character moments for plot progression within commercial runtime constraints. The resulting experience feels simultaneously overstuffed and curiously truncated in specific narrative areas. This tension between ambition and execution defines much of the film's critical reception. The cultural specificity embedded in Atlantean design synthesizes various real-world maritime traditions into coherent fantasy culture. Architectural elements suggest submerged Greco-Roman influences, while costume details incorporate Pacific Islander textile patterns. This multicultural fusion avoids appropriating any single tradition, instead creating respectful hybrid mythology. The linguistic elements suggest historical connections to surface languages while evolving distinct phonetic rules. This thoughtful cultural construction demonstrates world-building respect for real-world cultural diversity. The resulting society feels plausibly ancient and authentically alien simultaneously. The film's philosophical engagement with deep time ecology transcends simple environmentalism toward more holistic worldview. The portrayal of oceans as living memory of the planet connects contemporary crises to geological history. This perspective fosters humility regarding human timescales against planetary processes. The narrative treats climate change as symptom of deeper disconnection from ecological reality rather than technical problem. This philosophical foundation, while occasionally obscured by action requirements, provides intellectual substance beneath surface spectacle. The invitation to consider planetary-scale existence represents significant ambition for popular entertainment. The franchise's conclusion within DC Extended Universe context allows thematic closure unconstrained by sequel requirements. This narrative freedom enables definitive character resolutions and ideological statements without franchise management considerations. The finality permits emotional risks and philosophical commitments that ongoing serialized storytelling often avoids. The film leverages this unique position to advocate for specific values regarding environmental stewardship and international cooperation. This liberated storytelling, while uneven, demonstrates creative advantages of narrative conclusion over perpetual continuation. The sense of closure provides satisfying completeness to the character journeys began in preceding installments. In ultimate assessment, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom represents blockbuster filmmaking with substantive aspirations beyond commercial entertainment. Its successful elements, particularly the nuanced brotherhood dynamic and environmental integration, offer meaningful engagement with contemporary concerns. Its execution flaws reveal the difficulties of balancing multiple ambitious priorities within conventional studio frameworks. The film's cultural significance may grow as its ecological themes become increasingly urgent in global discourse. Its legacy within superhero genre history will likely emphasize its ambitious scope over its imperfect realization. The production stands as testament to creative attempts to merge popular spectacle with relevant thematic substance during a period of planetary crisis and cinematic transition. The film's architectural narrative is constructed upon the precarious foundation of a hero who has won his throne but lost his sense of purpose. This post-triumph exploration delves into the melancholic reality of maintaining peace, rather than thrillingly achieving it. Arthur Curry's journey becomes a meditation on stewardship, a concept far removed from the dazzling conquests of his origin story. The administrative burdens of kingship are portrayed not as trivialities, but as the true test of his character, weighing his impulsive nature against the deliberate pace of governance. This introspective focus provides a mature counterpoint to the expected spectacle, grounding the fantastical in recognizably human frustrations. Environmental degradation is personified not as a faceless force, but as the direct consequence of a particular historical arrogance. The orichalcum serves as a narrative device connecting ancient pride to contemporary catastrophe, a buried sin resurfacing with exponential consequences. Its discovery by Black Manta triggers a chain reaction that literalizes the concept of ecological blowback, where the past's toxic legacy actively dismantles the present. The film posits that the climate crisis is, at its core, a failure of memory and a refusal to confront historical transgressions. This framing elevates the conflict from a simple battle over a resource to a profound reckoning with generational responsibility. The dynamic between Arthur and ORM transcends simple reconciliation to become a case study in the dissolution of ideological certitude. ORM's surface journey functions as a systematic deprogramming, where every encounter with the world he despised chips away at his foundational beliefs. His expertise, once used to dominate, is repurposed for preservation, symbolizing the redemption of knowledge itself. Their alliance is built not on sudden affection, but on the pragmatic rubble of their former enmity, a bond forged in shared necessity rather than rediscovered brotherly love. This grants their partnership a gritty authenticity, avoiding sentimental pitfalls. Black Manta's tragic trajectory illustrates the corrosion of a singular human motive when amplified by ancient power. His vengeance, a painfully relatable driver, is hollowed out by the Black Trident, leaving only a screaming void where his personality once resided. This possession represents the ultimate failure of grief, a state where the desire for retrition consumes the self it seeks to avenge. He becomes a walking monument to the danger of living entirely within a past wrong, incapable of conceiving a future. His final form is a cautionary spectacle of how the tools we choose to rectify history can irrevocably distort our humanity. The production design philosophy articulates a clear environmental ethic through its stark aesthetic contrasts. Necros is visualized as the oncology of civilization, its jagged infrastructure metastasizing across pristine ecosystems. Its visual language is one of extraction and consumption, every surface appearing to leach life from its surroundings. Conversely, Atlantis, though advanced, exhibits an organic synergy. Its structures grow rather than being built, its energy flows rather than being harnessed. This dichotomy visually argues for a technology that exists in dialogue with nature rather than seeking to dominate it. The film's structural rhythm orchestrates a deliberate crescendo from political chamber drama to apocalyptic symphony. The initial acts linger in the claustrophobic spaces of council chambers and prison cells, emphasizing talk and strategy. This slow burn makes the eventual eruption into vast oceanic and glacial battlegrounds feel earned and momentous. The pacing challenges modern blockbuster norms by trusting that character logistics can build tension comparable to action sequences. This approach, while risking impatience, creates a more substantive narrative architecture, where spectacle feels consequential rather than obligatory. Mara's narrative presence, though physically limited, transforms into a symbolic anchor for the film's thematic core. She embodies the kingdom in stasis, a vision of peaceful continuity that must be defended from a distance. Her resilience, while injured, underscores that protection is not solely the domain of frontline combatants, but also of those who hold the center. Her strategic guidance from the palace reframes the role of the sovereign as a nexus of information and stability, not just a weapon. This portrayal complicates the hero's journey, presenting guardianship as a distributed responsibility across a network rather than a solitary burden. The mythological underpinning of Kordax reframes the climate crisis as a form of historical vengeance. He is not merely an ancient evil, but the embodied consequence of an earlier civilization's exile and neglect. His return signifies the inability of containment strategies to permanently solve problems created by injustice and ecological disregard. This backstory suggests that today's emergencies are the unhealed wounds of yesterday's conflicts, demanding reconciliation, not just stronger prisons. The legend provides a mythic scale to the understanding that environmental and social histories are inextricably intertwined. Cinematographic choices meticulously chart the emotional and physical journey through color temperature and camera mobility. The warm, diffuse light of Arthur's terrestrial home gives way to the cool, ethereal bioluminescence of Atlantis, which is subsequently invaded by the corrosive, high-contrast glare of Necros energy. The camera, fluid and sweeping underwater, becomes more erratic and handheld in the tense surface world sequences, mirroring Arthur's own disorientation. This visual progression is a subtle but powerful storytelling tool, externalizing the protagonist's psychological and perceptual shifts throughout the escalating crisis. The screenplay's dialogue employs distinct linguistic registers to map the character's cultural and psychological positions. Arthur's speech, peppered with surface world idioms, often clashes with the formal, metric cadence of Atlantean protocol, highlighting his role as a permanent translator between worlds. ORM's dialogue undergoes a quiet transformation, his rigid syntax gradually loosening, admitting fragments of humor and uncertainty. Manta's language devolves from personal, hate-filled monologues into the archaic, collective pronouncements of Kordax, marking the erosion of his identity. This auditory character development is a sophisticated narrative layer. The film's philosophical proposition centers on interdependence as the fundamental law of both ecology and politics. The isolated, hierarchical models of both the surface world and Old Atlantis are proven catastrophically fragile. The solution emerges not from a singular hero, but from a contingent alliance of former enemies, different species, and rival kingdoms. This is a vision of strength through networked resilience, where the health of the whole is predicated on the connectivity of its parts. The climax is won not by a stronger force, but by a better coordinated system, a powerful metaphor for global challenges. The costume design arc functions as a visual biography for each major character. Arthur's attire sheds royal ornamentation for functional gear, signaling his shift from ceremonial king to working monarch. ORM's adoption of hybrid surface Atlantean clothing marks his transitional, in-between state of being. Manta's armor, initially a masterpiece of human engineering, becomes infected with organic Necros growth, illustrating the physical cost of his pact. These sartorial narratives provide continuous, wordless commentary on identity flux and adaptation throughout the film's events. The treatment of Atlantean technology advocates for a biomimetic future, where innovation mirrors biological systems. Their vehicles move like sea creatures, their buildings filter light like coral, and their energy systems appear cyclical rather than extractive. This stands in stark opposition to Necros tech, which is brutally mechanical and consumptive, embodying a philosophy of domination. The conflict, therefore, is between two visions of progress, one that seeks to integrate with natural law and one that seeks to supersede it. This technological ideology is a core, visually articulated argument of the film. The score's compositional strategy weaves aquatic soundscapes with thematic leitmotifs that evolve with the narrative. The use of vast, echoing spaces and fluid melodic lines creates an auditory signature for the oceanic world. Character themes are not static. ORM's motif incorporates tentative, unfamiliar harmonies as he changes, while the Necros material warps the established Atlantean musical language with distortion and inversion. The music thus becomes an active participant in world building and character development, shaping emotional response at a subconscious level. The film's resolution favors open-ended responsibility over closed narrative finality. Arthur's revelation to the UN is not an ending, but the beginning of an unimaginably complex diplomatic endeavor. ORM's freedom is not a reward but a challenge to define himself outside any system. The sealed threat of Necros remains, a contained but not eradicated historical lesson. This refusal to provide clean closure is intellectually honest, suggesting that the work of building a sustainable world is perpetual, requiring constant vigilance and renewal beyond any single victory. The direction of performance prioritizes a physical vocabulary born of aquatic adaptation. Even on land, the Atlantean characters move with a weightless economy and a torsional strength that suggests a different relationship with gravity and resistance. This consistent physicality is a masterclass in embodied world building, making their otherness feel innate and believable. The performances bridge the epic and the intimate, allowing moments of quiet recognition to resonate amidst sequences of grand spectacle, ensuring the human scale is never lost. The movie's cultural commentary extends to a critique of monopolized knowledge. The crisis is exacerbated because the history of orichalcum and necris was buried, not shared. Atlantis's isolationism and the surface world's ignorance are two sides of the same coin of disastrous secrecy. The path to salvation requires the forced sharing of hidden histories and guarded technologies. This positions transparency and open science as heroic acts, and hoarding knowledge as a potentially civilization-ending vice, a resonant idea in an age of information silos. The atmospheric and weather phenomena in the climax are active antagonistic forces. The melting ice cap is a dynamic, collapsing character in the final battle, not a passive setting. Storms and geothermal eruptions respond to the magical conflict, visually cementing the idea that the planetary system is intimately connected to the spiritual and political health of its inhabitants. This animation of the environment underscores the film's core premise. The Earth is not a stage for our dramas, but a reactive participant. The film's legacy within the superhero genre may be as a transitional work that attempted to graft substantive ecological and political discourse onto a mega-budget framework. It demonstrates both the potential and the limitations of the form, showcasing how spectacular visual language can be used to argue for restraint and interconnection. Its successes and failures provide a valuable map for future filmmakers seeking to balance entertainment with advocacy, and its ambition to be about something urgent may outlast criticisms of its execution. The intricate sound design creates distinct auditory ecologies for each realm. The Necris soundscape is a symphony of cracking ice, grinding metal, and deeping groans, evoking pain and mechanical stress. Atlantis, in contrast, hums with organic, resonant frequencies and the distant, peaceful calls of marine life. These soundscapes are not just background. They are essential to understanding the moral and environmental status of each location, telling the story of a place's health through its noise or its silence. Arthur's character growth is measured in his increasing capacity for strategic patience and delegation. His early impulsiveness, once his greatest asset, is shown to be a liability for a ruling king. The narrative forces him to learn the strength of trust, in his brother's knowledge, in his wife's stewardship, in the possibility of an alliance with former foes. His heroism matures from the act of delivering a decisive blow to the act of orchestrating a collaborative response, a more complex and demanding form of leadership. The film employs a sophisticated color theory to track moral and environmental contagion. The sickly green aura of the black trident acts as a visual toxin, infecting scenes with its pallor as it spreads. The pristine blues of the Arctic are progressively invaded by this necrotic hue and the angry oranges of volcanic exposure. This chromatic progression allows the audience to viscerally perceive the spread of corruption at a glance, making abstract decay concretely visible and emotionally immediate. The editing patterns create a compelling dialectic between the vast and the minute. Soaring establishing shots of entire kingdoms are juxtaposed with extreme close-ups on characters' eyes, trident points, or the microgeography of a frozen bubble. This rhythm visually reinforces the film's central theme, that the fate of the macrocosm, the planet, is determined by countless microchoices, a glance of trust, a decision to strike or parry. The edit insists on the connection between the intimate moment and the global consequence. The mythology of the Seven Kingdoms expands the film's scope into a parable of failed federation. The historical schism that created the separate kingdoms mirrors humanity's own fractured geopolitics in the face of shared threats. The lost kingdom of Necris is the ultimate result of secession and isolation, a warning of what happens when collective responsibility is abandoned for selfish sovereignty. Arthur's quest becomes one of refederation, not conquest, seeking to reconnect what fear and pride have sundered. The portrayal of marine life elevates it from fauna to citizenry. The creatures of the ocean are not mere mounts or tools. They are allies with agency, suffering victims of the pollution, and active participants in the defense of their home. This perspective fosters an ecological empathy that extends beyond the human and even the humanoid, proposing a truly planetary solidarity that includes all conscious life. It is a bold, imaginative step towards a more biocentric worldview in mainstream cinema. The political mechanics of Atlantis are glimpsed through a lens of intricate tradition and simmering discontent. The Council of Kingdoms is not a rubber stamp, but a forum of competing interests, showcasing the difficulty of unified action even in the face of doom. This political realism adds grit to the fantasy, acknowledging that saving the world requires not just beating a monster, but also navigating bureaucracy, persuasion, and the delicate balance of power among stakeholders with divergent priorities. The film's humor, largely derived from the culture clash between Arthur and ORM, serves a crucial purpose beyond levity. Their comedic friction is the process by which their worldviews are sanded down and made compatible. The jokes expose the absurdities in both the surface and Atlantean perspectives, creating a middle ground of shared irony from which genuine partnership can grow. The humor is integrative, helping to blend two disparate tones and characters into a cohesive unit. The concept of kingdom itself is interrogated and redefined. Is it a territory to be ruled, a people to be served, or an ecosystem to be sustained? Arthur inherits one definition but must forge another. His final act revealing Atlantis to the world effectively dissolves the old concept of an isolated, secret kingdom. He chooses to redefine his sovereignty as a form of public advocacy and open partnership, exchanging the power of mystery for the power of connection. The visual effects oscillate between breathtaking spectacle and moments of obvious artificiality. At their best, they realize a coherent, awe-inspiring alien ecology. At their weakest, they can undermine the physical stakes with a cartoonish gloss. This inconsistency reflects the immense challenge of rendering a fully digital, physics-defying environment with tangible weight and danger. The ambition to visualize the unimaginable sometimes outpaces the technology's ability to sell it with complete conviction. The film's ethical framework is distinctly non-utilitarian. The goal is not the sacrifice of the few for the many, but the invention of a solution that protects all. Arthur refuses to sacrifice his brother, his kingdom, or the surface world. The narrative insists on finding a third way, a path of ingenuity and unity that rejects tragic choices. This optimistic stance is a political and ecological statement, arguing that with enough will and cooperation, false dichotomies can be overcome. The use of relics and artifacts, like the Black Trident, ties power directly to history and legacy. These are not neutral tools. They carry the will and the flaws of their creators. Wielding them is not just an act of strength, but an act of consent to a certain historical narrative. Arthur's ultimate reliance on his own will and his forged alliances, rather than a supreme artifact, represents a break from cyclical history, a choice to make new power rather than reclaim old power. The sonic signature of the Black Trident is a character in itself, a distorted, metallic shriek that violates the natural soundscape. Its sound is invasive, painful to hear, and marks its presence audibly before it is seen. This clever design makes the weapon feel actively malevolent and corrupting, an oral virus. Its silence upon defeat is as powerful a moment as its visual destruction, representing the restoration of a healthier sonic environment. The film's pacing in the third act embraces a chaotic, multi-front war that mirrors the complexity of modern crises. The audience must track Arthur and ORM's mission, Mara's defense of Atlantis, and the global environmental collapse simultaneously. This narrative fragmentation is stressful but intentional, immersing the viewer in the overwhelming, parallel process nature of a planetary emergency where no single front is the sole priority. The character of Kingfish, while brief, represents a different model of aquatic rule, one based on cleverness, information brokerage, and transactional loyalty. His presence adds texture to the political landscape of the deep, showing that not all power is derived from monarchy or brute force. He is a creature of the marketplace, offering a glimpse into the complex economies and social structures that exist in the shadows of the royal narrative. The film's portrayal of ice and freezing is not just environmental but metaphorical. The ice of Antarctica is the planet's memory, a locked archive of climate history. Necros's attempt to melt it is an attempt to erase that record and unleash a volatile, amnesiac future. The ice also represents suspended time and trapped history, both literally, Kordax, and figuratively, the frozen conflicts between the brothers, between land and sea. The thaw is dangerous but also necessary for true resolution. The lighting design in underwater scenes rejects the cliché of uniform blue darkness. Instead, it uses shafts of distant surface light, concentrated beams from bioluminescent life, and the diffuse glow of cities to create pools of visibility in vast blackness. This technique emphasizes the ocean's scale and mystery, making the inhabited spaces feel like cherished oases in an endless, unknown void. It visually communicates the preciousness and fragility of these civilizations. The film's ultimate villain is not a person but a pattern, the pattern of vengeance, isolation, and extractive consumption. Kordax and Manta are avatars of this pattern, which has recurred throughout history. The real victory is not killing the avatar, but breaking the pattern itself. This is achieved through the new patterns Arthur fosters: cooperation, transparency, and regenerative care. The battle is thus ideological, fought over which pattern will define the future. The closing image of Arthur, ORM, and their family sharing a meal is a quietly radical conclusion for a superhero epic. The victory is not commemorated with a statue or a parade, but with the re-establishment of domestic, cross-cultural intimacy. It posits that the ultimate reward for saving the world is the simple, profound ability to share a meal in peace with your once sworn enemy, now your brother. It is a triumph of the hearth over the monument, a fitting end for a story about coming home. The narrative structure of the film expertly intertwines personal vendetta with planetary peril, creating a complex web of cause and effect. Black Manta's quest for vengeance unwittingly unlocks an ancient ecological curse, demonstrating how individual actions can trigger global consequences. This linkage between intimate motive and universal threat provides a compelling framework for the superhero genre, elevating the stakes beyond mere physical confrontation. The story argues convincingly that the sins of the past inevitably resurface to challenge the present, demanding acknowledgement and redress. This cyclical notion of history provides a rich mythological texture to the environmental message at the film's core. Visual storytelling reaches its zenith in the depiction of the Lost Kingdom itself, a marvel of ominous production design and atmospheric rendering. Necrus stands as a character in its own right, a malevolent entity crafted from shadow and jagged geometry. Its design philosophy rejects the organic fluidity of Atlantis in favor of harsh angular structures that seem to violate natural law. This visual dichotomy creates an instinctual understanding of the conflict between growth and decay, between symbiotic civilization and parasitic empire. The kingdom feels authentically ancient and terrifyingly alien, a testament to the filmmaker's commitment to tangible world building. Arthur Curry's evolution from reluctant ruler to proactive statesman forms the emotional backbone of the narrative. His initial impatience with royal protocol gradually matures into a nuanced understanding of diplomatic necessity. This growth is most evident in his interactions with surface world governments, where he learns to leverage his unique position as an intermediary. The film avoids portraying this development as a seamless transition, instead highlighting the stumbles and frustrations inherent in changing entrenched systems. His leadership style ultimately synthesizes his human compassion with his Atlantean duty, forging a new model of kingship for a connected age. The thematic exploration of brotherhood delves into the complex process of reconciling with a shared painful history. Arthur and ORM's relationship progresses through stages of forced cooperation, grudging respect, and eventual loyalty. Their journey together serves as a microcosm for larger societal healing, suggesting that dialogue and shared purpose can bridge even the widest ideological divides. The screenplay wisely avoids a simplistic reunion, allowing their bond to remain complicated and earned. This nuanced portrayal provides the film with its most authentic and moving emotional beats. Environmental catastrophe is rendered not as abstract background, but as an actively escalating character within the plot. The accelerating climate breakdown forces all societies to confront their interdependence regardless of their historical isolation. The film's portrayal of rising seas and violent storms carries a palpable urgency that transcends typical blockbuster destruction. These phenomena are directly tied to the antagonist's actions, creating a clear chain of responsibility from individual choice to planetary consequence. This narrative choice grounds the fantastic elements in a scientifically resonant and emotionally charged reality. Mara's strategic role redefines the concept of power away from frontline combat toward intelligence and governance. Her management of the Atlantean defense in Arthur's absence showcases a different but equally vital form of heroism. This narrative decision expands the film's perspective on leadership, demonstrating that effective rule requires both the warrior and the administrator. Her resilience under pressure provides a steady moral compass for the audience amidst the chaotic action sequences. Her reduced physical presence paradoxically amplifies her importance as the guardian of continuity and core values. The mythological expansion through Kordax serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power and eternal grudges. His backstory provides necessary context for the current crisis, framing it as the latest chapter in a very old story. This ancient grudge, echoing through millennia, adds a layer of tragic inevitability to the conflict. The possession of Black Manta illustrates how such historical hatreds can corrupt contemporary grievances, creating a feedback loop of destruction. The resolution requires not just defeating a foe, but finally laying an ancient bitterness to rest. Cinematographic techniques masterfully distinguish the three primary worlds through movement, palette, and composition. The surface world is shot with stable frames and warm practical light, emphasizing its grounded reality. Atlantis employs flowing camera moves and ethereal blue tones, creating a sense of weightless wonder. Necros utilizes jagged edits and sickly green filters, inducing visceral discomfort. These distinct visual languages allow for instantaneous audience orientation while reinforcing the thematic contrasts between each realm. The director's command of visual storytelling provides crucial narrative clarity across a sprawling fantastical landscape. The screenplay's dialogue crafts unique voices that reveal character depth and cultural background. Arthur's colloquial surface speech constantly bumps against the formal rhetoric of Atlantean court language, highlighting his dual identity. ORM's evolving diction mirrors his internal journey, as his precise aristocratic syntax gradually admits more human uncertainty. Manta's language decays from personal vitriol into the collective pronouncements of his possessing entity, charting his loss of self. These linguistic details offer a sophisticated layer of characterization that rewards attentive viewing and listening. Philosophical underpinnings advocate for an ethics of interdependence as the only viable response to existential threats. The film systematically deconstructs the idea of the lone hero or the isolated kingdom, arguing instead for networked resilience. Solutions emerge from collaborative effort and the integration of diverse perspectives and specialized knowledge. This vision presents a powerful alternative to the hyper-individualistic narratives common to the genre. The climax is achieved not by a singular overpowering force, but by a delicately coordinated alliance of disparate elements working in concert. Costume design narrates silent stories of transformation, identity, and allegiance throughout the film. Arthur's wardrobe sheds ornate royal garb for practical battle gear, signaling his shift from ceremonial figurehead to hands-on protector. ORM's adoption of surface world fabrics over his Atlantean uniform visually documents his changing loyalties and self-perception. Manta's armor undergoes a horrifying biological transformation as the Necros influence grows, symbolizing the corruption of his original mission. These visual cues provide continuous subtextual commentary on each character's journey without requiring explicit exposition. Atlantean technology is presented as an ideal of biomimicry and sustainable integration with the natural world. Its vehicles move with animal grace, its structures emulate coral formations, and its energy appears drawn from renewable oceanic forces. This stands in deliberate opposition to the extractive mechanical paradigm of Necros, which consumes life for fuel. The conflict therefore represents a clash between two possible futures, one based on synergy and one on exploitation. This technological world building supports the film's environmental thesis with elegant visual logic. The musical score functions as an emotional guide and a subtle narrative device, weaving together aquatic soundscapes and character themes. The composer utilizes unique instrumentation to create an auditory identity for the underwater world, distinct from typical orchestral bombast. Character motifs evolve across the runtime, mirroring personal transformations, particularly ORM's gradual assimilation of surface world melodies into his own theme. The music for Necros distorts established Atlantean harmonies with dissonance and digital corruption, sonically representing ideological infection. The film's resolution embraces open-ended responsibility over neat narrative closure, acknowledging that real work continues after the final battle. Arthur's revelation to the United Nations is not an ending, but the start of an infinitely complex diplomatic endeavor. ORM's freedom presents him with the challenge of building a new identity outside any system he has known. This refusal to tie everything off with a bow reflects a mature understanding that systemic crises require ongoing engagement rather than singular victories. The story concludes on a note of cautious optimism and continued vigilance. Performance direction elicits a physicality that communicates cultural heritage beyond mere dialogue. The actors portraying Atlanteans move with a fluid torsional strength, suggesting a life adapted to underwater resistance. This embodied difference persists even in surface settings, reinforcing their otherness in a believable, consistent manner. The performances skillfully balance monumental scale with intimate vulnerability, ensuring the human element remains accessible amidst the spectacle. The chemistry between the central brothers provides a believable anchor for their evolving dynamic from animosity to alliance. Cultural commentary extends to a critique of monopolized knowledge and the perils of historical secrecy. The crisis is exacerbated precisely because the truth about orichalcum and Necrus was buried by the ancients rather than shared. Atlantis's isolationism and the surface world's ignorance are portrayed as two sides of the same dangerous coin. The path to salvation necessitates the forced sharing of hidden histories and guarded technologies, framing transparency as a heroic imperative. This theme resonates deeply in an era of information silos and contested narratives. Atmospheric and geological phenomena participate actively in the climax as dynamic characters rather than passive settings. The melting ice cap is a collapsing entity that reshapes the battlefield in real time. Storms and geothermal vents respond to the magical conflict, visually cementing the link between planetary health and metaphysical balance. This animation of the environment underscores the core premise that the Earth is a reactive participant in our dramas, not an indifferent stage. The location itself becomes a living opponent and a fragile ally. The film's legacy within its genre may be as an ambitious, flawed attempt to marry ecological advocacy with mega-budget spectacle. It demonstrates both the potential and the pitfalls of using mainstream fantasy to engage with urgent real-world issues. Its successes in visual metaphor and character dynamics provide a template for future filmmakers. Its struggles with tonal consistency and narrative overload offer equally valuable lessons. The sheer ambition to be about something substantive may ultimately be remembered more fondly than its executional missteps. Sound design crafts distinct auditory ecologies that define each realm's moral and environmental status. Necrus echoes with the crack of breaking ice, the grind of machinery, and deep groans of distress. Atlantis resonates with organic harmonics and the distant peaceful calls of marine life. These are not mere backgrounds, but essential storytelling components conveying the health or sickness of a place through noise and silence. The audience can literally hear the corruption spreading, and later the relief of its cleansing. Arthur's character growth is measured in his expanding capacity for strategic patience and his willingness to trust former adversaries. His early impulsiveness is reframed as a liability for a ruling king, forcing him to adopt more collaborative, deliberative methods. His heroism matures from delivering decisive blows to orchestrating complex multilateral responses. This evolution is visually symbolized when his power is used not to strike, but to shield and stabilize, transforming the warrior king into a guardian steward. His journey is from strength to wisdom. A sophisticated color theory tracks environmental and moral contagion across the narrative. The sickly green aura of the Black Trident acts as a visual toxin infecting every scene it enters. The pristine blues and whites of the Arctic are progressively invaded by this necrotic hue and the angry orange of volcanic exposure. This chromatic progression allows viewers to perceive the spread of decay at a glance, making an abstract crisis viscerally visible. The final restoration of a balanced, integrated palette signals a hard-won, healthier state. Editing patterns create a compelling dialectic between the vast scale of kingdoms and the minute details of choice. Soaring shots of entire civilizations are juxtaposed with extreme close-ups on eyes' weapon points or collapsing ice crystals. This rhythmic contrast visually reinforces the theme that planetary fate is determined by countless micro-decisions. The film insists through its very structure on the connection between the intimate moment and the global consequence, making the personal political in the most literal sense. The expanded mythology of the Seven Kingdoms serves as a parable for failed federation and the costs of isolation. The historical schism mirrors humanity's own fractured geopolitics in the face of shared existential threats. Necrus represents the ultimate endpoint of secession and selfish sovereignty, a cautionary tale for any society that chooses to wall itself off. Arthur's quest becomes one of refederation, an effort to reconnect what fear and pride have torn asunder. This allegorical layer adds significant depth to the adventure narrative. Marine life is elevated from fauna to citizenry with agency and intrinsic value within the story. The creatures of the ocean are shown as allies with autonomy, suffering victims of pollution and active participants in defending their home. This perspective fosters a biocentric empathy that extends beyond the human and humanoid. It is a bold imaginative step toward a more inclusive ecological vision in mainstream cinema, where the right of other species to exist is narratively respected and defended. The political mechanics of Atlantis are portrayed with a refreshing complexity, showcasing competing interests and bureaucratic inertia. The Council of Kingdoms is not a monolithic entity, but a forum of divergent agendas. This political realism adds grit to the fantasy, acknowledging that saving the world requires navigating persuasion and power dynamics, not just combat. It grounds the epic struggle in the recognizably frustrating and essential work of building consensus among stakeholders with different priorities. Humor derived from culture clash serves the crucial function of sanding down ideological edges and building common ground. The comedic friction between Arthur and ORM exposes the absurdities in both their worldviews. Their shared laughter becomes a secret language outside of official duties and inherited hatreds. It is in these levitous interstices that a genuine bond is rediscovered, making the humor foundational to the emotional core rather than a disposable garnish. It integrates their characters instead of just relieving tension. The very concept of kingdom is interrogated and radically redefined by the narrative's end. Is it a territory, a people, or an ecosystem? Arthur inherits one definition but forges another. His act of revealing Atlantis effectively dissolves the old model of an isolated secret kingdom. He redefines his sovereignty as a form of open advocacy and partnership, exchanging the power of mystery for the power of connection. This represents a profound evolution of the traditional monarchical archetype. Visual effects oscillate between breathtaking spectacle of imagined biology and moments of weightless artificiality. At their best, they realize a coherent, awe-inspiring alien ecology that feels tangibly alive. At their weakest, they can undermine physical stakes with a cartoonish gloss. This inconsistency reflects the immense challenge of rendering a fully digital physics-defying world. The ambition to visualize the unimaginable sometimes outpaces the technology's ability to sell it with complete conviction. The ethical framework rejects utilitarian sacrifice in favor of finding a third way that protects all. Arthur refuses to sacrifice his brother, his kingdom, or the surface world. The narrative insists on a path of ingenuity and unity that overcomes tragic choices. This optimistic stance is a political and ecological statement, arguing that with enough will and cooperation, false dichotomies can be transcended. It champions a holistic approach to crisis management. Relics and artifacts carry the will and flaws of their creators, making them dangerous conduits of history. Wielding them is an act of consent to a particular historical narrative. Arthur's ultimate reliance on his own forged alliances, rather than a supreme artifact, represents a break from cyclical history. He chooses to make new power rather than reclaim old power. This thematic thread argues for innovation over tradition when tradition is poisoned. The sonic signature of the Black Trident is a character in itself, a distorted metallic shriek that violates natural soundscapes. Its sound is invasively painful, marking its presence audibly before it is seen. This design makes the weapon feel actively malevolent, an oral virus. Its silence upon defeat is as powerful as its visual destruction, representing the restoration of a healthier sonic environment. Sound becomes a measure of corruption and healing. Third act pacing embraces chaotic multi-front warfare, mirroring the complexity of real global crises. The audience must track simultaneous missions and collapsing systems. This narrative fragmentation is intentionally stressful, immersing viewers in the overwhelming parallel process nature of a planetary emergency. It denies the comfort of a single clear focal point, forcing a shared experience of clinging to hope amidst cascading failures. This is a bold formal choice for the genre. The character of Kingfish represents an alternative model of aquatic power based on information and transaction. His presence adds texture to the political landscape, showing that not all authority derives from monarchy or force. He is a creature of the marketplace and shadows, offering a glimpse into the complex economies existing beside the royal narrative. This world-building detail makes the ocean feel like a lived-in place with diverse power structures. Ice functions as both environment and metaphor representing planetary memory and trapped history. The Antarctic ice is a locked archive of climate data. Necros's attempt to melt it is an effort to erase that record. The ice also symbolizes suspended time and frozen conflicts. The thaw it undergoes is dangerous, but necessary for true resolution and the release of pent-up truths. It is a setting rich with symbolic resonance. Underwater lighting rejects uniform blue darkness in favor of shafts of surface light and concentrated bioluminescence. This technique emphasizes the ocean's vast scale and mystery, making civilized spaces feel like precious oases. It visually communicates the fragility and value of these habitats. The lighting design tells a story of life clinging to illumination against the overwhelming void, a powerful visual metaphor. The ultimate antagonist is identified as a destructive pattern of vengeance, isolation, and consumption. Kordax and Manta are avatars of this recurring historical pattern. The real victory is breaking the pattern itself through new models of cooperation, transparency, and care. The battle is thus ideological, fought over which template will define the future. This elevates the conflict from personal to systemic. Arthur's portrayal as a father is intentionally awkward and heartfelt, normalizing his heroism through universal vulnerability. His love is expressed through protective anxiety and clumsy play, making the planetary stakes emotionally accessible. The fate of the world connects to the simple image of a father reading a bedtime story. This bridge between the epic and the intimate is one of the film's most effective emotional strategies. Editing during the discovery of Necros uses disorienting rapid cuts to simulate overwhelming horror. The audience is denied a coherent establishing shot, experiencing the kingdom as a barrage of terrifying impressions. This subjective, fragmented presentation makes the Lost Kingdom feel genuinely unknowable and maddening. It is a more effective and frightening reveal than any grand panorama could be. The concept of blood operates on literal, magical, and symbolic levels throughout the narrative. Kordax's seal requires royal blood, reducing dynasty to biology. Arthur offers his sweat and loyalty instead. The film argues true legacy is written in actions, not bloodlines. The blood that matters is the shared lifeblood of a healthy planet and its interconnected societies, a powerful metaphorical reframing. Surface world lighting often uses practical sources like fire and lamps, creating warmth and texture. This aesthetic subtly reinforces ORM's growing affinity for the world he once despised. Its light feels more organic and alive compared to the static glow of Atlantis. This is a visual cue to his changing allegiance, a subconscious priming for his eventual choice of exile. ORM's resolution, choosing surface exile, is a sophisticated, authentic conclusion rather than a conventionally happy one. He is not reintegrated but freed to find himself. His final act of sharing a meal is a personal peace treaty with a world he was raised to destroy. It is an ending about finding home in a state of grace, not a kingdom, a resonant and adult denouement. Alliances are built on gritty pragmatism, not instant fellowship, reflecting real-world crisis diplomacy. The team is a coalition of necessity held together by mutual threat and converging interest. Trust is built incrementally through demonstrated action. This realism about cooperation feels more applicable to actual global challenges than the standard superhero team-up trope. The Black Trident's sound is engineered to be physiologically unsettling, triggering dread before conscious processing. This brilliant sound design makes the object's evil palpable on a visceral level. Its destruction brings auditory catharsis, a feeling of the world's frequency being retuned to harmony. Sound becomes a narrative weapon and a measure of restoration. The final act is a race against thermodynamic collapse, battling physics itself as systems tip into chaos. Stakes are raised beyond the personal into the cosmic. Victory is about buying time and stabilizing systems, a metaphor for the fragile reprieves our civilization must engineer. It is a powerful narrative expression of our current precarious moment. Wide shots after battles are intentionally sobering inventories of cost, not glorifications of destruction. They show shattered landscapes and exhausted survivors, forcing the audience to sit with consequences. This directorial choice injects melancholy and responsibility into the genre, a reminder that every victory leaves a world to be rebuilt. The core metaphor is the release of pressure from sealed evil to bottled-up grievances to greenhouse gases. The narrative argues controlled, conscious release of truth and collaboration is the only alternative to catastrophic explosion. Arthur learns to be a release valve, not a stronger container for the pressures threatening his world. Kordax's spectral form is a swirling vortex of dark energy, a sentient storm of resentment. He is less a being and more a poisoned force of nature. Defeating him requires not greater force, but a counter-frequency of unity that disrupts his coherent malice. This design reinforces his nature as an ideological pattern, not a person. The film's lasting image is a shared table, not a throne, redefining power from vertical authority to horizontal connection. The future is built on the daily practice of breaking bread together, of integrating differences into a nourishing whole. It is a hopeful, humble, powerful final statement on the kind of world worth the immense struggle to save.